Welcome back. In this particular video, we are going to have a look at how do we go about in writing a program in C which involves functions. We'll have a look at two important concepts or terminologies in C functions. One is called as parameters and one is called as the return statement. Now let us try to understand in a much better fashion how do we land up writing a program in C which involves functions. Now try to recollect our user-defined function called as 1, 2, and 3. Let us try to develop a program. So I have a program where I start from main and then I say a simple printf called as I am in main. Then I call a user-defined function called as 1. And then once again I have a printf which tells me I am back in main. Okay, and then I come down, and this is how you write your user defined functions which should be written outside the main. And then here I have I am in function 1. Okay, so let us see how it works, right? So you have this main, and then you have this particular line that gets executed. You are calling a user defined function 1. So the control from line number 5 will go to line number 9. It will execute line number 10, and line number 11 control will take back to line number 5, and then line number 6 will be executed sequentially. Then you go back to line number 7. So let me execute this particular program. So it's giving some warning for me because so I have this error and I have not declared the function prototype. So I just say 1, and these are some of the syntax errors. Right, so that's what it is. So you have that warning, but it says I am in main, I am in function 1, and then I'm back in main. Right? So you can also have a data type for the function. So you just say int, and then you can execute once again. Yeah, now this is what it is. So you have this 3 lines output. I am in main, I am in function 1, I am back in main. So that is how basically the function works in C. Now what we can do is we can slightly alter this, and then you can have the another user defined function called as 2, and then you can once again say printf /n once again back in main. After that's okay, once again back in main. Then you can also have int 2, and then you say printf I am in function 2. So you can go top, and then you can have one more prototype declaration int 2. Okay, so I'm making use of two user defined functions called as 1 and 2. Now this is the code for function 1, this is the code for function 2, right? And then I'll execute this, and so I have some syntax error. So this gets eliminated. Now that's the output, right? So I am in main, then I'm in function 1, then again I am back in main, then from main I go to function 2, and then I'm back to main once again. So right, so in this example you see that main is actually responsible to call your user defined function 1 and 2, and hence the control comes back to main. Right, now let us have a slight variation in this. We remove these 2 lines, and we will see that we call the user defined function 2 from 1, and then we say I'm back from function 2. Okay, so this is how I have written my user-defined function. Now you'll see a small change that main is actually calling function 1, so the control comes here. And here you will see that function 1 is actually calling function 2 in line number 14. And hence it goes to line number 18. It will execute line number 19 and 20. And line number 21 will ensure it goes back to line number 14. Then 15, 16 will be executed. Then line number 16 will ensure control goes back to line number 7, and then line number 8 will be executed. So let me run this particular program. Right, so that is how you get the output, and that's how you see that in this case main was actually responsible to call library function 1. Library function 1 was responsible to call library function 2, and then once 2 is executed, the control goes back to 1, and once the program statements under user defined function 1 gets executed, right, the control goes back to main, and then the main program gets terminated. So this is how basically you can call the functions depending upon your usage or application. Now just imagine when your bike actually got punctured, right? Uh, does it so happen that you go and call a mechanic and mechanic says, I am not in a position to repair the bike? Even though he's, now you may say, sir, he might be probably a four-wheeler expert and he cannot repair a two-wheeler bike. Not necessarily. Assume that he is expert in two-wheeler as well. One of the reason why he cannot repair your bike is he would have not bought the tools, which is very essential part of that particular application. Correct? So merely getting a mechanic or merely mechanic coming to your place to repair your bike is not at all important or will not suffice unless and until the mechanic comes with the so-called tools, the tools which are actually responsible, right, to repair your bike. Now such type of tools, what we call in C functions, we call it as parameters. Now what do you mean by this? A calling function can send a package of values for the called function to operate or to control how function is to operate. Okay. Now each value passed in this particular manner is actually called as a parameter or an argument. I repeat, it is called as a parameter or an argument. Let us try to understand this with an example. So let us say I have a main program. I have a variable called as float a, and then I say a is equal to sqrt of 144.0, and then I say printf value of a is equal to %f, and that gives me the value of a. Okay, and I don't need this user defined functions as of now for this application. So that's a simple program, right? So let me execute and see what it gives me. Correct. So it gives me a warning. I mean, that's okay with me, right? So value of a is equal to 12.00. So that is what you get the output. Now look at this, try to understand. Now what happens is when you are calling this function sqrt, actually it is a library function, right? Sqrt is a library function which is prototype in a header file called as math.h, right? You might be aware of it. It is a library function which is prototype in math.h, and this sqrt takes you see something in the bracket called as 144.0 right now. So be careful, this 144.0 is what is actually called as a parameter. That's what I said sometimes back, that a calling function can send a package of values for the called function to operate or probably to control how that particular function should be operating. So each value, right, that is 144.0 in this case, each value passed in this manner is actually called as a parameter or an argument. So how I will interpret line number 6. Line number 6 goes like this, that you are calling a library function called as sqrt with one parameter, and that parameter is nothing but 144.0, right? So that is what is the meaning of parameter. Now watch out very carefully. When a function is called, parameter specified within the parenthesis of the calling function is known as actual parameter, right? Now let us try to understand. Here 144 is a parameter for library function sqrt. Similarly, you can also have parameters for a user defined function, right? Now let us say I try to develop a program called as adding two numbers, right, with the help of user defined function. Let me see how I'll end up developing it. So I have this a, b and c, a, b and sum, and I say printf. Okay, so let us have a look at this particular program. So I have declared three variables in line number 5, and then I have line number 6 and 7. Now watch out carefully, line number 8. I am calling a user defined function. There's a small change here. I should interchange this. Okay, I'm calling a user defined function called as add, which takes two parameters. Right now this parameter is called as a and b. Watch out carefully, this parameter is called as a and b. So whatever you enter as the will be stored in variable a and b, you call the function with that parameter. Now watch out, you are calling function with two parameters. Now this is called as called function, and this will become a calling function, right? Now that's what I said. When a function is called, this one, line number 8, when a function is called, parameter specified within the parenthesis, right? Which are the parameters? A and b. Parameter specified within the parenthesis of the calling statement is known as actual parameter. So whatever you see variable a and b in the brackets in line number 8, that is called as actual parameter. Okay, that is actually transmitted to the function. Transmitted to the function means where? Line number 12, that is add. Right now here also I have two variables, n1 and n2. So value of variable a comes and sits in variable n1, value of b comes and sits in variable n2. So a and b actually are called as actual parameters. On the other hand, variable n1 and n2 are called as formal parameters. Okay, so let me sum up these parameters once again. When a function is called, parameter specified within the parenthesis of a calling statement is known as actual parameter because it is actually transmitted to the function, and then this is in contrast with what is called as formal parameter, which is the name of the corresponding parameter in the called function. Okay, so you have to be a little bit careful. Then I have a variable called as total. Right now, as I said sometimes back, the value of a will come and sit in n1, the value of b will come and sit in n2. So int I have total, so total is equal to n1 plus n2, right? So the addition of n1 and n2 will take place, and then what happens is you are using return in line number 15, right? Now let us understand what is this return, right? Now you have seen the concept of parameters. Now this particular return basically allows you to return something from the function back to the place from where it has been called. So this is extremely important, right? It is extremely important even though the control goes back to the place, but if you want to return specifically something from the user defined function, right? See, I can as well skip this particular line, okay, and then do it like this, but that will not suffice my purpose, because the addition which takes place in line number 14 is not returning back to the main program, and hence it is extremely important for me to send the value of that variable back to the main program. So how does this return statement work? When you call a function, two things happens actually. First, the execution of the current function is paused, and second, the function that you call actually executes, right? This is what we call as transfer of control. When you call a function of the control, when you call a function, the control of the program is transferred from the calling function to the called function. We have seen this earlier. The return statement, understand, the return statement returns the control to the previous routine. That function will continue its execution from the point where it was paused. Actually, what I want to say is, on the contrary, a function that calls the return statement is finished. It is not in a paused state and it cannot resume. So if there is no return statement encountered until it encounters the closing brace, the control do passes back to the calling program. This is actually termed as falling off the end. I repeat, this is actually termed as falling off the end, one of the most common asked question in interviews, right? So let us see now what happens when I make an attempt to execute this particular program. So I have okay, so let me have a prototype declaration for this, and then I make an attempt to execute once again. So I think the online compiler is taking pretty amount of time to execute. Okay, so it's asking me to give the inputs here. So I'll just give as 5 and 6, and then I'll execute it. So that's the mistake I have done. The variable, it should be sum. So let us say I've given the input as 5 and 6, and then I execute it, and I get sum of a and b is 11, right? So this is how it works. Sum of a and b is 11 when you give input as 5 and 6. Now let us try to understand for the benefit of you if you are not understood. See, I have entered two numbers called as a and b, right? So a gets the value 5 and b gets 6. So you are calling a function add, right, in line number 9 with 5 and 6 as parameters, right? So a is 5, b is 6. Now this 5 and 6 comes and stores in n1 and n2 in line number 13. So my n1 is 5 and n2 is 6. Now line number 15 will add that 5 and 6, which is 11, and the result is stored in variable called as total. And this 16 will return this total, which is 11, to line number 9. And actually speaking, line number 9, once the control comes from the function, it looks something like this. Sum is equal to 11 semicolon, which is a valid statement. And hence further line number 10 will execute and it will say sum of A and B is 11, right? So this is how actually your program works in C in terms of how to add two numbers, right, using functions. Okay, now watch out. We had made a statement that a user defined function actually has got three components: the function prototype, the function declaration, that is function declaration, the function call, and the function definition. So line number 3 is actually what you call it as function declaration. It is also called as prototype, right? Then you come to line number 9. Here you actually called as add a comma b. This was what you have written earlier. So this is actually called as function call. And then line number 13 is what we call it as function definition. Okay, so user defined functions are of three types, three components of user defined function. You have function declaration or prototype. A small spelling mistake, it does not matter. So line number 3 is function declaration or function prototype, and line number 9 is actually called as function call, correct? And line number 13 is actually called as function definition. So these are actually three components of user defined function, right? So normally function declaration or prototype means normally it is declared prior to the use, basically allows the compiler to check the type of arguments. Okay, so it has got its return data type as integer, name of the function is add, and I am going to use two parameters for that add function, and the data type of those parameters are integer. Okay, now if I don't write this, error checking will actually not take place. Then the second one is actually called as function call, which is there in line number 9, right? Now place in the source code, right, in your entire program, in your entire source code, this is the place where you are calling the function. So I can say line number 9 is the place where I am calling the function, and then whatever you written in line number 13 to 17, this is called as function definition, which is nothing but the collection of program statements which comes under the body of function, right, under the body of that particular function, which is add in this case. Okay, so this is brief about three components: function declaration or prototype, function call, and function definition.